I'll make it up, I'll make it, I'll make it up, I'll make it up,
It's Saturday, November 8th, 2025, 1 p.m. Central Standard Time here in Champaign, Illinois. You're watching Co-op for Two, and you're joining me for Game Design Diary number 10, talking about New York Noir, the board game I've been working on for the last couple of years. Let me check in with the chat before we get started. We're just talking in the chat about screaming at the computer. My voice is hoarse from screaming at the computer all morning. This has just been a bit of a stressful day so far. But it looks like everyone's doing okay. At least we made it to the live stream. So those of you who have been following the development of New York Noir on Board Game Geek or on the Co-op for Two Discord, the last design diary was about 3 hours and had some flashy stuff to show, including some online map tools and everything. This is going to be a much less flashy update because most of the work I've been doing lately has been sort of unpleasant, very little to show for it. But I will talk a little bit about that, about the work that's been done. And we're sort of moving. It's almost like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, but we are doing the unpleasant parts now that have to get done in order to get a final production ready version of New York Noir. So onward we go. Let me bring up my little set of slides. As always, I'm happy to talk about whatever. In fact, I'd love if this session was mostly question and answer, but I do have some prepared stuff to go through. Melissa says, what kind of coffee am I drinking? I'm drinking the this Mexican Chiapas from the local roaster here. Anyway, if I don't respond to your question right away, I will get to it, but I'll just do a bunch of talking and then occasionally check in with the chat. Okay, let's see what's on schedule for today. A little bit of a recap. I'm going to talk mostly about updates to the directory. I'll give you a little update on the cases available for New York Noir. I'll talk about a little experiment I did with guided play, previously known as the New York Noir role-playing game. We'll talk a little bit about timeline, roadmap, and then I'm going to talk about what I really care about here, which is getting some volunteers for some final stuff with New York Noir. Okay, let's do a little bit of a recap here. Now, this is our latest box. You've seen this before. The front cover is not that different, but boy, the back cover got a huge upgrade. It's a little blurry, isn't it? That's because of the focus. The back box bottom got a huge upgrade from Adam, and it's got nice side stuff. But you have seen this in previous updates. But let's get our materials here so I can refer to them when I show you what's been changed. We did play a case by Anna called The Rookie recently, a great case. You can watch a playthrough of that or download this and play it yourself. I don't think I've talked about let me just get all the directories out so that I can refer to them. Okay. Rule book, I guess we don't need that. All right, so let me put the cases off to the side. I don't need those. But I will need the map to talk about. White pages, yellow pages, reverse directory. I don't think we need that. You can watch the previous update for discussions about the fingerprint directory and criminal history directory. I think I showed off the street. I'm not sure I showed off the street number guide in the last update, so let me keep that handy. That's another case. Okay, so let's talk about... So what was I was going to do a recap. What's the recap? I guess we don't need a recap. Let's just get into the directory update. Okay, so the first thing, I don't remember exactly what was shown in the last design diary. This is this is the most recent printed version of the map atlas, but not the latest version of the map atlas. I'm going to show you what's different in a second. But from the last design diary, I don't think that we had all of Logan's art. So Logan is the one who's been doing huge amounts of work, not just research into all of these buildings. These are all the way these real buildings looked at the time. And Logan has spent months researching buildings, looking for good art, architectural art to put in. And we have finally put all of his art into the map data and directories. I guess this is the map atlas I should talk about, not directories. But it has actually been, all of his places have been put in. This printout, I don't think has all of them, but most of them. They're all labeled. They're all, now notice that financial district is so tight it's hard to get buildings in. I'm going to talk about that at the end here. But anyway, the point is all hundreds and hundreds of illustrations of interesting places got incorporated into the art of the maps. And this is not the latest. This is the latest I have printed out. In fact, let me see if I have the latest here. Now, I've been having a little bit of trouble with this. I think it looks okay for you, but not, looks weird. The colors are messed up for me. Okay, so let's take, this is good. Now I can compare a little bit. So here is the last printed version of the map atlas. And we can compare this a little bit to the most recent version I have. So I added a little page here describing things and describing the zoning, coloring, and symbols. Last time I had it play tested at the local convention, people were asking, well, what do the colors mean? What about the symbols? So this is a little bit of an introduction to the zoning and coloring. We'll probably try to improve the way that looks eventually. And then we have the starting page here. Now it looks all messed up. The colors look super pink for me, the background, but I think that's part of what I was screaming about at the computer this morning. I think it looks okay on your screen. You can let me know. Not that I can fix it if it doesn't. Okay, so let me turn the page here. All right, so now one of the things I have done since our last update is I've improved all the photos. So if you look at the last map atlas, we had some photos. Some of them were nice and some of them were not as good, and they were sort of all different styles and a little bit, I mean, some of them are reasonable. Some of them are good, some of them not so good. So one of the things that has been updated here is I went and found new photos for all of the neighborhoods. Public domain photos. So we've got better photos, better size too. I mean, will these be the final photos? I hope we find different ones. I'm trying to capture each neighborhood, the feel and the architecture of each neighborhood. But so a whole new set of photographs for each neighborhood. The other thing that I want to show you is points of interest. A little bit of debate about this, but if you look at the old map atlas, each neighborhood has some points of interest, and they're sort of ad hoc. They were sort of just randomly chosen. They're nice in the sense that they tell you of each category, but they're just sort of ad hoc list of points of interest. One of the things that I've decided to do differently now is that the points of interest now match Logan's art. So in each neighborhood, the list of points of interest here are exactly these drawings. And that's the way it is on every map now. So if you look at Hamilton Heights, this list of points of interest maps to the buildings in the neighborhood. So every neighborhood, the points of interest match the buildings. I think that makes sense. I think that makes more sense than just putting them random places here, which would be different from the drawings and that you'd have to look up. They're just for flavor. So in this way, you could look at these. Maybe we'll remove the labels even on the map, and you could just look at them here. And you can see they list the block number. So you can see 13 is All Saints Roman Catholic Church. And if you go to 13, you can see it here. So I think that makes sense. What else has been done on the maps? So in addition to all the art that Logan's been drawing, he did a huge amount of research into real places. And so we finally, I mean, it took us weeks, but Logan and I finally got all of the real place and their real addresses into the directory data. And now we have about 2,500 real places, real businesses, real locations, mixed with about 4,500 fictional places. That's what you would find in the yellow pages. We still have a couple issues with some new illustrations that Logan is going to add and put them in at higher resolution and put the labels in at higher resolution. The other thing that I did recently was I went back through the ethnic naming database. So let me take a little bit of a step back here. I've talked about this a little bit before, but there's two big pieces of software behind New York Noir. One is the front end thing that helps build case books and creates cases. And the other one is the tool that creates data for the directories and the map data and all that stuff. And the residents of New York City are all populated by code. It's Python code that puts people in apartment buildings at specific addresses. It gives them names depending on the ethnic breakdown of certain neighborhoods. So certain neighborhoods have more Italians and Chinese and all that stuff. And so we've gradually over time been improving the database of names, last names and first names for different ethnicities. In some cases, that data is readily available. In some cases, it's not. And in general, with all of this directory, I've sort of been going through stages. I do a lot of work on it, and then I build the directory and it's good enough, and then I work on other stuff. But it has caused problems because the authors of cases write a case for a given, when the directory is at a certain state, and then when I try to improve the directory, it messes things up a little bit, causes inconvenience. So what I've really been trying to do for the last couple months is really nail down the directories and finish them and get them locked in so that case authors can feel confident that when they write a case and places and people will be in the same place. So it hasn't been the most enjoyable, but part of that means going back to the name databases and trying to improve those a little bit. So I've tried to do that, but I could use some more help looking through these directories. So what I've done is I have a whole bunch of code that produces different directories that are sort of internal. And here's one of them. This is sort of the census name directory sorted by frequency. So basically, it's listing all of the residents that it has created with Arabic names, male and female, and then Black, and you can see British and Dutch. Now, here are the Chinese names. So this is all being done in code, and they're sprinkled throughout Manhattan in different neighborhoods, but this directory organizes them like this, just so that someone proofreading, looking for issues with names, can help spot names that seem inappropriate. So if you have some familiarity with some ethnic names, I've started a thread on Boardgame Geek asking for feedback, and this is one of the directories that I'm hoping someone can go through and just look for names that look obviously wrong. There's just thousands and thousands in the name database. It's very hard to find them. So there's two things I guess you want to be looking for if you're helping proof this. One is just for names that look odd, and the other one is for frequencies of last names. You can see here Kelly seems to be the most popular Irish last name, followed by Murphy, Collins. Anyway, so if you have some thoughts on issues, maybe for a specific demographic, you've got an idea of something that seems wrong, but I could use more feedback with that. But it is definitely much improved from where it is before. Okay. Another thing that was done, I gotta figure out a better way to do it. Okay. Another thing that was done with the directory is I stumbled across a book from 1915 or so about apartment buildings, real apartment buildings in New York City, in Manhattan. And this book has like 200 apartment buildings. For each apartment building, it's got like a photo and it's got floor plans. A huge proportion of the residents of New York City live in apartment buildings. And that's actually an important game mechanic in New York Noir, talking to neighbors and stuff. So another thing I've done since the last update is I went through this book and I added about 200 apartment buildings, real apartment buildings where they really were. I'm not matching the floor plan or the number of floors, but these buildings are in the directory where they would be. And I started tweaking the population code that puts people into apartment buildings. And so there are many more people in apartment buildings now than there were in the previous version of the directory. I think it's about 35-40% of the population now in the city, in the directory, live in apartment buildings. And then the other thing I realized is that the mechanic with the apartment building is if you find an apartment building in the directory, for example, here, the Palmerston, there's the address of the apartment building. Here are the residents. I've improved that a little bit. There were occasionally times when it was weird. And then there's an entry for the apartment building itself, which you would be talking to the doorman or the maintenance person. What I've added now is duplexes. So there are about now 800 or so duplexes scattered throughout the city. A duplex is quite common in Manhattan, and that would be when there would be like a downstairs unit and an upstairs unit, or a left unit and a right unit. In those cases, the building isn't named. There's no doorman, but each person has like one neighbor that they're above or below. So you'll find now in the new directories a lot of duplexes. And part of that duplex code was another thing that I improved. I improved the placement of people and businesses in the city, better obeying zoning. So if you look at these maps now, you'll see compared to the old maps, there's a little bit more variety in zoning. Like each neighborhood has some of this manufacturing, maritime. That's the red is the manufacturing and yellow is office. So I did a little bit of tweaking of the real zoning in New York City to give each neighborhood like an area that's office buildings, non-residential, and manufacturing. And then an interesting thing happened. I built a tool. Is it here? Street number guide? No. Okay. So there is a street number guide that was requested of me at some time. Very short thing that would help you find numbers of streets. So if you knew someone lived on 120 East 55th Street, you could find out what neighborhood that crossed. Not so important here, but if you look, for example, at Broadway, you can see Broadway runs the whole course of Manhattan, and you can see the lower values of Broadway, like 25 Broadway, is in the financial district on the south, and then as you go up, you start to go uptown. Anyway, what I was saying is, I sent my mother, I grew up in New York City, and my mother spent most of her life in New York City, and I sent it to her, and I sent her the list of street names, which is actually a different directory. I'm not sure I have it here. Yes, I do. Okay. So I built a separate directory that lists every street name and all the addresses on each street. And again, huge amount of these directory building is just to find bugs. So this was to help me find bugs in the naming of streets. And I sent her this. These are all the streets in Manhattan that are populated. Okay, I sent her this and she said, hey, you're missing a couple of interesting, very small streets that are my favorite, like Washington Mews. I don't even know what a Mews is. A Mews used to be like, I think the idea of a Mews, MEWS, was that it's like a bunch of connected little, like they used to be stables or connected houses in a row, like row houses. Anyway, she said, you're missing some of these streets because it was just building a directory of where people were really populated. And I realized that there were occasions when there were certain little tiny streets in Manhattan that weren't getting populated. So I wrote some new code to make sure that every street in Manhattan has something on it, a little bit of something, and part of that is putting these duplexes. But so in the process of that, we got all of these extra little odd, tiny little streets in Manhattan that no one has heard of have become populated. So, and much less no missing blocks with no things on them. So much improved placement of people in the directory and places. It used to be, if you look in the old directory, it wasn't that uncommon to find a business or two people at the same street address. And that could be problematic for authors. Like you could put someone on an address and not realize someone else was at that same address. But someone playing the case might notice it and think it's significant. So now the code will not let that happen. If people are at the same address, it'll say upper, lower floor, etc. So slowly but surely, lots of improvements to the directory. All right, let me answer a couple questions before I continue here. All these changes will be reflected in the online tools, absolutely. As soon as I stabilize these directories a little bit, the online tool will be updated to reflect all of it. The online map and search is the fastest way to write cases. So the latest directory will be in that. But part of what I'm trying to do is stop doing these every month, have a new directory. I'm really trying to finish the directories, lock them in, and then not mess with them and have authors know that they've got a predictable directory. Okay, Delia had a question up above my comment about not looking too big. Are there plans of making the online map able to save a gameplay? If I'm working on a case, I'd like to save my bookmark on the website so I can see them later. Yeah, Peter, who created the online map stuff, actually has put in a huge amount of work to help it, to setting up games so they can be played. And he has a whole bookmark system. So yeah, I think he was getting a little irritated that I kept updating the maps. So I think once we get the maps locked in, we can return to the online tools and try to make tools that add features that are good for players and good for case authors. Obviously, I'm focused on both, but I'm particularly sensitive to case authors, making tools for case authors. All right, now let's see what else I have here. So I told you I put more people in apartment buildings and duplexes, better placement of people. I went through the maps. I also added a couple of bridges and tunnels that were missing. I've also added a bunch of categories that I can't remember if I talked about in the latest design diary, but let me bring up the yellow pages here and show you what I mean. So there's the yellow pages, but of course it's white here. So in addition to readjusting these categories a little bit, one of the other things I'm doing is going through the yellow pages. It takes days and days and days to go through these, trying to figure out if there are too many of this, too few of this. Are the names for any of these weird? Are the names for any of these fictional places real places that don't belong in this time? It's a huge pain, but I could use more help. So if you think you have some idea about what kinds of places would be useful from a game standpoint, if you've played Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, I could use help brainstorming. Are there things missing from the yellow pages categories that should be added? Are there too few of some category, too many of another? All the data has, certain neighborhoods where certain districts where certain kinds of places are more frequent. That's all in the data of the system, but it can all be messed with and list of fictional names. But so I have tweaked. There are a couple categories that there are huge numbers of, couple categories there's only a few of, couple categories are mostly real places. But I wanted to show you a couple of categories that are relatively new. I mean, there's some changes here like radio and television stations, textiles and garments, some reorganization of places. But if you look down here, there are a couple of categories. One of the things we talked about at some point is what happens when someone might want to write a case and it's a category that doesn't, like, let's say you came up with some new category of business. Maybe you were writing a case that was set in a future time, might be a computer store or something, and you don't have an entry in the yellow pages or something. So one of the things that we've got a whole bunch of places now that are sort of generic. So we've got office and commercial space, and you can see what we've got here is a whole bunch of office buildings that any business might be in. So if you made a character who worked in some business and you said, okay, the business isn't in the yellow pages, but I'm going to sit him in a floor of an office building. So we've got a whole bunch of, on this page here, generic office commercial space that you could put people in that run some business that's not there. And then there's got to be a better way to go to the table of contents, isn't there? Okay. That's office space. There's a whole bunch of, there are a couple other things now. There's a whole category of uncategorized. So this is recent. I think this should stay in, but maybe you have an opinion about it. So if I go to uncategorized, these are sort of entries that it's not office space. It's just sort of businesses, companies that haven't been categorized. And they're sort of mysterious little named places that maybe you might have use of in a case, and you would, as an author, decide what they do. I'm trying to think about some more supernatural occult cases might be available. So you don't know what category they are in the Yellow Pages, but here they are, at least business names available. You can figure out how you want to use them. And then we've got a whole set of places that are scattered throughout each neighborhood that are abandoned properties, condemned buildings, empty warehouses, structure under construction, an undeveloped city lot, a vacant lot. So these are just scattered all over the map. Every neighborhood has a few. So maybe you want to make a case where someone's hiding in a condemned building, etc. You've got stuff. You've got that stuff for the Yellow Pages. Okay. What else is new and improved? I guess I've covered all of those. I'm not sure you're going to be able to spot the changes to the maps here, but there were a couple maps. There are a couple things that I put off for a long time fixing and improving, and I finally got around to. For example, just as an example, if you look at Chinatown, let's see if we can find Chinatown here in this latest version. Okay, so here's Chinatown. Now, if we look at the previous map atlas of Chinatown, can we notice a difference? I think we can notice a difference. So what's happened is you've got all this white space in Chinatown, and that's because of the awkward shape of it. So I just did a little bit of surgery to some of the neighborhoods. In Chinatown, I took off this strip, put it in the Civic Center neighborhood. And then what did I do here? I guess that's the main thing I did. It just let me make it a little larger on the map atlas page. So there are a couple maps that fell into this category. They were uncomfortably small. And I fixed up a couple of those. And I'm going to show you some other bridges I added uptown. In fact, I can show you that right now after I answer some questions. Could you clarify if the floor plans for the real apartments correspond in some way to the directory? Okay, the answer is no. The reason so in the directory, the real apartment building with its real name at its real location in Manhattan are implemented. But because, but I haven't made an attempt to match the number of floors for each building. So, for example, if we just look, this is an old directory, but here's the Abingdon, and it's got 5 floors and a penthouse. And if you looked at the real Abingdon, you might find it's a 10-floor apartment building with, 100 apartments. Because it's an odd thing with the directory that the directory is sort of a sampling, right? There are 10,000 people in this directory, but in real New York, you might have millions. So obviously, in every apartment building, there aren't really going to be 300 people in there. So the directory doesn't try to match the population of a building or the size of it. It's just sort of a representative thing. Now, I have gone in, I made a couple tweaks so that there are a couple big apartment buildings in the directory now that have like 29 floors and do have 100 people in them, but just a few of them. So, the floor plan from that apartment book that I showed you, the only reason I mention that, it's not incorporated into the game. I can't bring it up now. It's not incorporated into the game. It's just fun that that book has a bit of a history and photo and floor plan of each apartment building, because an author could go for inspiration, go pick an apartment building, look at the floor plan, and then write a story that uses that floor plan as part of their case, but that's up to the author. It's not part of the directory. All right, let me show you something else. Okay, I went over the neighborhood guide with the new points of interest. I haven't shown you the new subway map. So I'm going through all the stuff that got put off, and I'm trying to check off everything, update everything, get everything ready for production. So one of the things that is particularly unpleasant, there are subway stops all over Manhattan here, and at the back of the map atlas is a subway map. This was a real subway map from the 40s. All of these stops in Manhattan and different train lines are reflected in the directories. So there are subway stations everywhere there should be. But this is a kind of uncomfortable thing that I've used this existing subway map. I've tried to blur out the areas that are not in Manhattan. You've got Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, and it's just a bit messy and hard to read. And people may need to use this to track where someone has gone, etc. So, let's see if I can show you the subway map that I've got now. Okay, so I've got a combined subway and bus guide now. So here is my version of the subway map. You can see what I've done here is I've focused in on Manhattan. I've used an actual simplified New York City subway map and then cleaned it up in Photoshop. So basically, I'm showing the station stops as they leave Manhattan into the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, New Jersey, but I haven't shown the actual stops in those boroughs because they're not relevant. And I've tried to clean up everything else that's too busy. And then because this is such a tall aspect ratio, even though it's compressed in terms of the actual island of Manhattan is much longer than it is wide here, but this is how, when they draw subway maps, we compress certain areas to make it fit on the page. But the other thing I took the opportunity to do is combine, is this better? Is combine bus information on this single page here. So now we have the subway map, which is much more readable. You can see the different subway lines and where the stops are. And then you've got information about buses, which is much more simplified for the game than it is in real life. In real life, buses go in different directions and everything. In New York Noir, the buses are all crosstown. Most of the subways run from north to south. So here is sort of game information to help players think about buses. And you can see it tells you each of the crosstown routes that go from west to east. And this little thing about lost items, this is reminding players about how the mechanic of buses work. And to remind you how the mechanic of buses work, if you look at any at the far west end of Manhattan, all around here, this is where you can see bus symbols. There are no stops for buses like there are a subway. These are subway stops. But this bus line runs all the way east to west across. So that's how all the buses work. They go all the way across town from one side to the other and back. And as a mechanic, if a suspect hopped on a bus, you would know he's going from east to west. And the way you would find out about that is you would talk to the bus driver who's in charge of that route. And that's where you could find them at the far left, at their starting route. Of course, you could also find them if you looked up buses and subways Um, if you look up buses and subways, what you see here is for subways, you see the stops. Each stop on the subway, each station is listed here. And for buses, you have what street they run crosstown. And so this would be that route, the 23rd Street route that runs all the way from west to east on 23rd Street. So anyway, this map just gives me an opportunity to remind players about that information on this nice one little sheet here. So I'm pretty happy with this, actually. I think this is going to be sufficient for us. Now, I did go through the trouble of actually putting all of the route, subway route, and bus route into actual GIS data. So if someone wanted to redraw this map from scratch, I have all the data to help with that. But I think this is probably good enough. I'm pretty happy with it. And it's nice because it shows all the different ways to leave Manhattan, right? These are all, you see the bridges here in the bottom, Williamsburg Bridge, Brooklyn Bridge, and up here we have the Queensboro Bridge. And over on the west, we have the George Washington Bridge. So it's a nice little map of not just the subway, but ways to get off, ways to get out of Manhattan, which are shown on individual neighborhood maps, of course. But I did add a couple that were missing. And so if someone hopped on a subway and fled Manhattan into Queens, you could see there's the 3 subway lines they would take to get into Queens. And of course, you'll remember that New York Noir is focused mainly on Manhattan, but there are entries for each of the boroughs outside of Manhattan. So there's the overview of where Manhattan sits with the other boroughs, Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, etc. And then we've got each of the boroughs. You could go to each of these neighborhoods in each borough if you hear something. And I've talked about before how to think about that, maybe like calling a local police precinct in this area of this borough. So while I'm at it here, let me just talk. Well, I'll come back to that. I'll come back. Let's go back to our itinerary here. There's a bunch more directories I've made to help authors, like a directory of docks and piers, and directory of manufacturing, zoning, and a directory of apartments, just apartment buildings, so that there's a whole bunch of ways that if you're an author and you're curious, like I want to set a case that's highly dependent on people in apartment buildings, there's a separate directory that only authors would have access to. Okay. Let me talk a little bit about status of cases. I mean, Martinez is heading out now, but you can see his cases here. Martinez Conradi, author of some of my favorite Sherlock Holmes consulting detective cases, has written 2 cases for New York Noir now. Anna has finished 3 cases. We've played one of them. We'll be playing the other 2, I think, in December, along with Martinez's case. Jonathan Warner wrote a case as well. I've written my 3 cases. We've got 2 cases that were written prior to the modern version of the New York Noir directories that need to be slightly upgraded. They're mostly upgraded, but they need a little bit of work testing. And then we've got a whole bunch of cases that are sort of in progress. But I think we've had a little bit of a slowdown writing cases. And part of that has been because I've shifted to working on the directories. I haven't been as active encouraging writing of cases, but I'm hoping that will reverse as soon as the directories are locked down. Now I feel very comfortable once they're locked down of encouraging authors to write cases. I very much want to get back to writing a new case. I've got some ideas. If you're watching this and you're interested in writing a case, I've written a whole big guide to writing good cases, and I've been trying to update that. And I'll make some more tutorials soon. But there are a bunch of cases you can now download and play. Okay, quickly, let me talk about New York Noir RPG guided play, because I made some posts on Boardgame Geek about this idea of using New York Noir as sort of a foundation for a more interactive role-playing game type game. And I wrote up a whole bunch of rules and guidelines and thoughts on it. And I thought we might get someone who was accomplished at running role-playing games to give it a try, but since we didn't, I gave it a bit of a try with a local group here. And I want to tell you a little bit about how that went. And I think what we learned from it, it actually went quite well, but what we learned from it is the people I played with had some experience playing role-playing games, and a couple people said this on Boardgame Geek as well. They all sort of objected to calling it a role-playing game. They said, you don't have characters, you don't run stats for them, you don't build them, it's not really a role-playing game. But what we did was, normally with the New York Noir case, like a Sherlock Holmes consulting detective case, the players read through, they decide where to go, and then they read the paragraphs. And instead, this idea of a guided play is you have one person who's running the game, and they track everything and do the reading. So the players are still doing the things that players normally do. They're looking through the directories, they're deciding where to go, who to visit. But a game master is sort of tracking their time, keeping track of where they go, and then reading the entries, and occasionally letting the players freeform improv a scene within the game. So the game master has to understand the case well enough to do that. But we did it, and it seemed to work very well. Mostly I was reading, but there are a couple scene of the crime scenes where I just said, okay, you're in the room, go search it. And they said, okay, we're going to look here, or we're going to talk to this person and ask them this. What do they say? And I think it actually worked very well. And I think it may appeal to players that are a little hesitant to do all the bookkeeping and prefer the occasional improv scene, and also don't want to worry about getting stuck and having to look up hints. I mean, New York Noir has a whole hint system, but one of the advantages of having a guided play is that the person running it can sort of nudge them in one way or the other, maybe even introduce a character that says, hey, did you remember to go do this? And the beauty of this is it doesn't require any special production. Any case, you could take any case and play it in this way. So I think probably I rejiggered the rules a little bit. I rewrote a little bit of the guide for how to do this, but I should probably do it a little bit more. But I do think this is a reasonable way to play these cases. And I might try to do a little bit more of this. Maybe next time I go to Gen Con, I'll run a guided session of New York Noir. It certainly requires less teaching and less bookkeeping on the part of the players. So yeah, it was a success, but we shouldn't call it a role-playing game. If someone's interested in taking this material, making a role-playing game, that's still on a possibility, but not for me, but guided play. Okay, a little bit of a roadmap here of what timeline I'm looking at here. I'm the plan is by the end of this year to have the directories finalized, done. We'll be able to add places. Like if we want to add custom places and custom people, that's easy. But I really want to get the fictional stuff and the fictional residents and businesses, everything locked in by the beginning of January 2026 so that it's on the map, that authors don't have to worry about things changing. 6 months after that, June 2026, I want to have the finalized art for everything. Now, there's one big piece of art that still remains to be done that we need to find some volunteers to help with. And I think that art will make a big difference, and that is the parks. Now, I've also added a lot more parks since this directory, but all the greenery, maybe I can bring this back up. Every neighborhood has green blocks. These are zoned for parks or gardens, some neighborhoods more than others. And in fact, some of these parks are quite famous. I mean, Central Park, of course, we've got an existing illustration there. But for example, Greenwich Village has Washington Square Park. Quite famous there. So I think one of the ways we're going to make these maps look a little less a little more colorful and personal is I want every green block to be illustrated. So parks that are known, like Washington Square Park has a known architecture, that should be drawn in. And Adam, who did the box, did one little sample here for Hell's Kitchen. And this is the style I want. I really love this sort of, what would you call it? Sort of a abstract flowchart, even diagram of the park where you can actually see the paths. So it's not too busy, but you could even imagine like being told that a suspect entered from the south and went straight up the path and then jogged right and exited at the northeast corner of the park. You could almost see, you could even imagine them hiding behind a tree. You could imagine a scene where, you know, a suspect jumped out behind the tree and hit someone on the head. So this is what I want for all of the parks. Every green block on every neighborhood should have some custom art like that. And for some of these parks, there will be, you know, some known architecture like a fountain and known pathways. But I think this will give a little more personality to these maps. So it's a substantial amount of work. We've got to find someone, probably one person, to do the actual drawing, but we could also use a volunteer to help them do research on these parks so that we have what the real park looked like. So the person drawing doesn't have to do both the research and the drawing. All right, let's see what else. Oops. So I'm giving us 6 months to finalize that. Hopefully it won't take that long, but it could, I guess. And then the goal is going to be by the end of 2026 to have it physically produced. Probably that means something like Kickstarter so that we know how many copies to produce. But we're going to have to source it and figure out how cheap we can get it made. I don't think there's going to be any attempt to make any kind of profit on it. I do think it will be important to get physical copies to all of our serious case authors for free. So we'll have to, maybe we'll try to do a little bit of fundraising to raise enough money to send free copies to all of our serious case authors. And then maybe try to put it on Kickstarter, not with the hope of making a profit, but with the hope of covering all costs comfortably. And I'm sure it will be expensive, but at least with Kickstarter, we'll know how many copies we have to produce. And then the other piece of the software coding that is closest to my heart is support for a play-by-mail system. And if you've watched the playthroughs on this channel of the games by Murders of by Mail, that's what I'm thinking of. Something where it's a case where the way you play it is you go online and each week you put in your moves, and then you get the reply in the mail a few days later describing you went here, you saw this, you went here. It's just a way of, it requires a whole back end to be written, but basically software to produce the letters that are replies to the moves. We've got some ideas about it. It's a fairly large project, but I'm hoping to have that done by the end of 2026. Logan says, Logan who did all of this building art is volunteering to work on the park art, which would be great. Month for park art. Well, we'll see. Buildings, piers, boats. Oh, that's the other thing I didn't even talk about. The other way to give some flavor to these maps and not make them look so sterile is to add some other art, like all the water. We want to put some boats and ships in there. We've got one. Yeah, here's a neighborhood that shows some example of ships in the harbors and piers. Oh, it was Hell's Kitchen, right? Okay. So these are the final touches that are just for flavor, but make a big difference in making these maps feel more interesting and real. Logan has done amazing work on the building art, and all of these building arts you'll be able to use in higher resolution version in your cases as well. And I think maybe we'll try to add a few more apartment buildings from that apartment building book, since those seem like things that would be used frequently in cases. Okay, so there's our timeline. 2026 is the year when New York Noir is going to get finished and produced. At least the base materials. Cases, hopefully, will be continuing to produce going forward. So let me summarize a little bit about the art volunteers that I'm really looking for now. The parks are the main one. Parks and the ships and stuff. So Logan is the boss of all that, but we could use some help or some more people who might be interested in or helping with research. I was thinking there are a couple areas where you could imagine sort of a nice fold-out long brochure. One is Central Park. We're using an existing Central Park map, but you could imagine a custom Central Park expanded map would be nice. Overview of Manhattan. So that I haven't talked about, but I do want to. I think I might have. Yeah, here. Okay. Oops. So there's two maps that I'm currently just using some existing maps. It's the one on the left that I'm really keen to have replaced. The one on the left is an attempt to show how Manhattan fits into its surrounding areas. You see New Jersey on the left, and then you see the Bronx up to the northeast, different boroughs. So we have a different view of it on this next map here, which just shows the neighboring boroughs. But this left map shows something that I think we need a better map of, and that is the surrounding little islands. So on that map there, what you might have a hard time seeing is there. I would need to. Let's see if I can bring it up here. Okay, so there's this map. So the important information that this map shows, that I'd love to have someone redraw this map. So we don't need any of the detail here, but what we do need is this. There's Bledsoe Island, where the Statue of Liberty is. There's Ellis Island on the far left of that map. Governor's Island, and then down here we have Randall's Island. We have Rikers Island, where there's a big prison. So those are all areas that you can visit in the game. And so what I want is a nice simplified map, sort of like maybe how I did that subway map, but basically showing the islands, where this extra set of half dozen little islands, where they are spatially, and maybe where New Jersey, maybe where these other boroughs are. Like a nice, very simplified map that shows you here's Manhattan and here's its surrounds that you could visit, just so people have a better spatial feeling for it. Arsene says, what kind of art style are you looking? Does the art have to be digital? It doesn't have to be digital. Obviously, it would get scanned and put into the PDFs, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be drawn digitally, and most of what we're doing is, but as long as it can be scanned. But I don't have a strong preference for this. It should just look semi-period, but this one does not. This one is more for readability than art. So I'm not looking for something that looks super detailed, just more something that's easier to read. But I don't have a particular. Most of this stuff is sort of, if a volunteer feels strongly about it, then that's better than having nothing. Okay, so I talked about the parks. So here's another thing, business cards. These are some sample business cards that were made by someone who did an amazing job making Sherlock Holmes consulting detective business cards, but doesn't have the time to do them for New York Noir. But I talked a little bit about this at the last design diary about embracing the use of allies and context. So the New York Noir cases I've written now have about 10 or 12 contacts, and what we want to do is have business cards for every contact. So these are a couple of them, but I'd love to find someone who feels comfortable about doing business cards for every contact, and maybe for future contacts for other people's cases. So if this appeals to you, and then the idea would be to have these produced. Well, let me show you. Here is Eric is the person who made these cards for Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective for each of the allies, which are beautiful. And so this is the kind of style I was thinking we would have for New York Noir. And they're nice, printed on nice plastic stock. So you could see how these would be fun to have with the game. There's a little custom card he made for Call for Two. But so I want these for each of our 12 main contacts, but maybe whole sets of others for other authors. I don't think they need to be, they almost don't have to be totally unique, or at least, well, anyway. So someone who feels like that might be a job that they can handle, that might be what I would be very happy to have a volunteer for that. We're gonna have to figure out some way to do the financial district art. We don't really know how to cram that into the financial district map, those buildings that Logan has done, without covering up stuff, but I'm open to ideas. We will need to obviously fill in some of our other rule books and stuff with some art, but Logan is handling the building stuff and rivers and maybe parks. Okay, we're almost done here. So a couple more areas where I would love to have volunteers: proofreading the directories, proofreading the ethnic names. This is stuff I talked about in the beginning. There's still a bunch of work that the maps could use for looking for streets that aren't labeled, or streets where the street name is overlapping. Like, these all look okay, but I'm sure there are places where two street names are too tight. Probably if we went to the financial district, we could find some. Or like here, you can see this one's just a little bit too high up. It's sort of touching this block. Stuff like that. So I could still use help checking for that kind of stuff. I have talked about the yellow pages. So let me just show you one more quick thing with the yellow pages. So this requires someone who has some comfort with the idea of how these directories are being used. But all of these categories have, it's a big directory, and you can see some of them say, agriculture, farming, stable, see also pet stores. So there's a whole bunch of these that have see also. Clothing stores says see also tailors, textiles. So if you click on one of those, you get something like this. Clothing stores, here's a listing of clothing stores, and here's the other listings. So that's all useful, but maybe you have some ideas of some categories that I haven't covered and should. There's also this page that I'm pretty happy with. In addition to this, if you turn the page, you see this. How to find it. If you're looking for adoptions, then you would look under the category of family services, etc. So I'd love more help here too. There are a couple things, for example, when we played Anna's case, I think it was, or we played some case, and I said, I have to find a hardware store. And I went into the yellow pages, and I couldn't find hardware store. Now it's in there now, because I realized this is crazy. Hardware stores are a very common thing. So now you see hardware and paint stores is here, but previously it was under construction. And I realized that it needed to be here. Now, if you looked up construction here, you don't see construction, because I think construction is under contractors. But you can see construction is now on this list of how to find it. So I'd love more help here too. Like, are there things people might need to search for that they won't find here, and that we should have an entry here to help them find it? So lots of stuff like this. I could use more eyes looking at it, trying to figure out what are alternate names, what are categories that, like here, pharmacies, see drugstores, all stuff like that. And then just generally, I could use people going through this and saying, well, from a game perspective, like, for example, there's certain places we know, because we played a lot of these games, that it's good if there's a lot of them to sort of hide stuff, like antiques. And here are all these apartment buildings. You can see huge numbers now. But there are certain stores, certain categories that there are very few of, and I've been tweaking this a little bit more. There's lots of banks, lots of bars, lots of restaurants, but I reduced the number of bars. I figure 100 or so is enough. But you might look at this and say, hey, you need a lot more cemeteries, lots of churches, lots of clothing stores. Those seem to be important for cases. But you might look through this and say, there's not enough of these, there's too many of these. Are there enough doctors? Doctors tend to play a big role in cases. Maybe there aren't enough doctors. Anyway, you get the idea. All right. And then, of course, case authors. Playtesters we could always use as well. We've got a very good group of playtesters that are huge help to authors. But I'd love to have more authors writing cases, especially maybe some supernatural cases. But whatever you want. And we could always use more playtesters. And here's a little summary of where to learn more and participate. There's a Board Game Geek page for New York Noir. That's probably the best place. But there's also the Discord for this channel, Co-op for Two. We've got some channels for New York Noir. And you can always write me directly by email. If you want to support this project, there is a Patreon for the Co-op for Two channel. I'd love your support financially. And that's the end of our update number 10. after an hour and 10 minutes. Now let's see if there are any questions here. John says, after the directories have been largely locked down, would you be able to easily split up hardware stores out of construction without it having to regenerate the directory locations? Yes, I can rebuild. The data is built separately from the directories. So once the data for all the people and locations are locked down, I can easily change the organization of categories and reprint out the yellow pages or reformat it. And it's also easy to change category names and headings and groupings and all that. So yes, even after the directories are locked down. And of course, you know, as an author, I have written tools that if I do change stuff, I can migrate cases fairly painlessly. But to answer your question, very easy for me to change the organization and structure of categories without rebuilding the data. Any other questions, thoughts, especially from people interested in writing cases? Groot says, I'm currently partaking in creative writing sessions and hope to use those skills to write a case for New York Noir. I think I'd look to talk to people who have written successful cases first. Well, that's great. I mean, there is a Discord channel for case authors where we talk about that stuff. I have written a lot of pages on how to write good cases, and there is a demo. There are a couple big long serious cases for New York Noir, and now there's a very simple sort of demo case for New York Noir that I've written called The Past is a Crooked Game, which would be a great thing. So in my guide to writing cases, which is, I don't know if I'll be able to find it here. Let me not even try. But I have written a guide to writing cases, and I talk about what I think are the important things. But yeah, we'd be happy to help. We'd be happy to help give thoughts and advice and teach you the tools and play test it. Is there a starting guide for writing cases? There is. It's a little long-winded, but there absolutely is. And then there are a couple of video tutorials on using the New York Noir. There's a website, newyorknoir.org, that is used to help you write cases, tools to help you lay out cases. You don't have to worry about any of the typesetting or formatting or any of the complications, but you do have to learn a little bit how to use this tool. But there are some tutorials that I recorded on YouTube for how to get started, how to create an account, how to write your first case. There's a little template. You could just copy that and start writing your own case. We have a couple people now who have gone through the struggle, and we'd be happy to help you with all of the technical aspects of writing a case and some of the non-technical aspects as well. Other questions? I think I'm going to sit here for a little while and wait and see if there are questions, because we've only gone an hour and 10 minutes. So we've got some time. You can feel free to sign off now, but if anyone can think of any other questions they have. There are a couple things I'm most looking forward to. I mean, I'm looking forward to having the directories finished and locked down and be done with all that. I'm looking forward to writing another case. I have some ideas. I think my next case will be darker and more violent. The last case I made, my largest case, Foxtrot East, has gotten very few playtesters. It's definitely not a case to start with, but I would be curious to have more people playtest it. The other thing I'm looking forward to is playing some of the new cases that have been written. So Anna has a couple cases I haven't played. That Jonathan Warner wrote a case that I haven't played, and Martinez Conradi has written a couple cases. So I think we're going to try to play a bunch of those in December or so. Delia says, maybe also related to the online directory, it would be good to have a filter for yellow pages to choose neighborhoods. Peter's online map tools can already do that. They do it actually very nicely. And I think, do I have it all on here? I'm not sure I have it on this. So if you look, here's Peter's online tool. This is using a previous version of the directory. It's not perfectly suited for a tablet, but look, here is the map of Manhattan. You can zoom around. You can click on a place and see who lives there, what buildings are there. And you were just asking about the yellow pages searching by region. So if I delete here, let's say I say bank. Okay, so here, there's more banks than that. I think, okay, it's using only items with bank in their first name. Okay, so look, here are banks in Manhattan. And now look, see how that says region up at the top? If I click on that and say, just show me region banks in the financial district, look at that. So Peter has made some very nice map tools for New York Noir. And they're not 100% incorporated into the yellow pages, white pages system. So this is more like a generic search. You can see I've checked this box called author cheat mode. So this would be useful for authors because it's showing a list of every place with the word bank in its name, including someone named L. Banks and etc. So normally a player should not be able to get this list. So normally a player would only be able to search for the word bank in the white pages that starts something off, but also that's what Peter's tools don't currently do that nicely. From this map search, you can't do a yellow pages search. Now you can go into the yellow pages tab here and say banks, and then get a list of banks, and then try to go view it on the map, I think. But it's not ideal, because ideally I'd love to be able to do everything from this map and say, show me all yellow page category banks. You can't quite do that here, but I think Peter got a little tired of me updating the directory so much. So once we get the directory nailed down, hopefully I can convince Peter to do some updates to the map tools or open source them so that we can write some custom code. Will there be the addition of DNA material? By this I don't mean real DNA, but documents that have DNA profiles. There certainly won't be DNA because these cases are set in the 30s and 40s. Although there's no reason you couldn't write modern cases, but so I am very interested in exploring new mechanics. So DNA doesn't play a big role in the old cases, but fingerprints certainly do. And so a lot of work went into this fingerprint directory and mechanics for using it. So this fingerprint directory, let's see if I can do a better job of this. Fingerprint directory has a whole mechanic for how you would use fingerprints and classify them. And then it's broken up into two sections. The first half is just raw fingerprints categorized by type. So if you find a fingerprint somewhere, you could classify it and then look it up. In fact, my latest case, my biggest giant week-long case, Foxtrot East, does make use of fingerprints. So if you're playing this case and you come across fingerprints, here's how you would use them in the game. You'd say, okay, I know how to classify that. I've learned how to do fingerprint classification. You'd say, okay, that's a whirl with a scar here. You'd go in your fingerprint directory, you'd look up worlds, you'd try to find it, like, okay, maybe that's it. Then you'd get its number, 14382, and then you'd look that up in the case book, and 14382, and you turn to page 60, and that would be the result of looking up that fingerprint in the fingerprint directory. You could also say, okay, 14382, I've identified what that is. Let me look up and find the full prints of that person. That's what the second half of this book is. This is like criminal records. So here is that person's full set of prints. And then you could say, ah, okay, that was their index finger that we found. Maybe that tells you something. In fact, that was their right index finger. Maybe that tells you they're right-handed. And then here's the other prints on their right hand and the other prints on their left hand. So fingerprint system is a big tool for use in your cases. Now, most cases won't use them, but you can write a case that makes heavy use of it. My Foxtrot East does. And then there's this whole separate system of criminal history, which has not yet been used in a case. I've written a guide for how to use it, but I have talked about before the idea here of the criminal history. So what we have here is a big collection of people in the justice system, sorted by age. So we've got as young as 16-year-old all the way up to an 80-year-old. And we've got for each person, we've got their age, their gender, age, sex, ethnicity, height, weight, any noticeable tattoos, any known aliases, what neighborhood they were last picked up in, how many years did they serve in prison, what's their current status, are they free, this guy's been free for 4 years, this guy's on probation, this guy's in custody, this guy's on the lam, he must have escaped, a couple people are deceased, what kind of criminal are they, professional, petty, underworld, opportunist, etc. What subclass? So this person is mainly minor crimes, misdemeanors. Then we have felony, violent crime, organized crime, felony property, etc. And then the last crime they were actually arrested for, this person. So you might have a case where you've got like a witness says a middle-aged man with a scar on his cheek. You might look up and say, hey, that sounds like this guy. Petty trespass, he was arrested for. Well, that's not right, because my guy was a murderer. That's probably not him, etc. And then the same thing, you always look at the lead number and then look it up. So I think it would be nice to see someone make a case that uses it. If no one does, it'll have to be up to me, but I'd love to see someone try to make use of it. But I started answering this question because of the question about DNA. So DNA is probably not a candidate for us. It's because in the 30s and 40s. But I'm very interested in exploring other mechanics. I would love to have some other documents that people could use. For example, in the tool that helps you write cases, I have added a database of 100 shoe prints, several hundred shoe prints. So if you want to include some shoe prints in a case, you could do it, but I don't have a directory of them. But you could imagine there would be some, it would be nice to have some other research documents if someone wanted to prepare them, like a ballistics document, a tire tread, shoe print, directory document, just some more documents that could be used in cases. Other thoughts? There are lots of other little documents that would be nice if we could get some volunteers. I've written up a list somewhere, but as I said, like a little couple pages on ballistics, couple pages or a directory of shoe prints, tire tread. You could imagine that the FBI has prepared all sorts of things like that. If you play Razorhurst, John Keane has a nice little couple of reference pages that show things like information how you can get someone's shoe size to their height and all that kind of reference material, sort of detective reference material, detective guide would be nice to produce a little some auxiliary documents that people could use. It would also be nice to have sort of for case authors a sort of a guide to the years or the decades, so that if someone was writing, for example, let's say you're writing a case that's set in the 20s, it might be nice to have a little document where you could flip through and say, okay, here are the brands of cars, here's what they looked like, here are some, like common appliances or the cost of things. Like, it might be nice to have a little guide to the years for authors. They make a couple of these for writers. They make a little like guide to the 70s for writers. And it's just sort of like background information. So if you're writing a case set in 1925, here's the kinds of things that you could populate your world with to make it believable. Like, you don't want to be writing about people watching TV in 1910 because there's no TV stations. So it would be nice to have if someone is interested in doing some research, a guide to the years where it just lists some information so that a writer could say, okay, my case is 1933. Let me see, like, what were the important historical events going on? What were cars that are on the road? Here's some pictures of what people were wearing, the fashion of the day, expressions. Just a guide to writers for each of the years would be great. Other thoughts? Where's my tea? I probably should have said this earlier, but tomorrow there'll be another live Q&A where I'll be celebrating 5 years of this channel's existence and doing a little channel update. So I will see some of you tomorrow at 1 p.m. for that. It's a little odd to be doing these 2 in a row, but we spent all of October doing our spooky games, so I put these off till this weekend, and now we're just going to cram them both in together. I'd love to see some more experimental cases. So if you write a case for New York Noir, you can use my detective and his context, but you could invent your whole new world. You can create an alternate reality world that's occult or magical, or write a case from the perspective of kids or historians. I'd love to see some more experimental cases written from different viewpoints. Maybe you want to create your own detective. In fact, there's a document somewhere that I wrote up a while ago of ideas for settings for other stories. And there are a couple there that really appeal to me. Like one I called Old Man Holmes. Like Sherlock Holmes would have been like 80 years old in our New York of the 1920s, 1930s, so he could still be alive. I thought some fun cases where someone might be assisting Sherlock Holmes. As I said, I'd love to see some Cthulhu supernatural cases. I'd love to see like a little one of my favorite stories that Jonathan Warner found and read in his book club was from the poison chocolates case of the poison chocolates. And it's a group of mystery writers or mystery amateurs all together, like multiple sleuths talking. I love to have a case where we had like a reading group of multiple people exploring. And I'd love to see some, if you're interested in exploring new mechanics for these kinds of games, I'd be very interested in writing software to support that. One of the big possibilities that we haven't fully explored yet is the idea of doing some kind of analog version of what Chronicles of Crime does, where you could ask a person about another person or ask a person about an object. And I think you could do that using some lookup tables. But more importantly, the software for writing cases could help with that, could construct these tables dynamically so that as an author, there's very little you actually have to do. I think we will eventually get around to doing that. And then the whole play-by-mail stuff opens up lots of possibilities. The AI narration stuff opens up other possibilities. So I think maybe the most exciting parts about this project are still to come once we get that foundation done and we can start riffing off writing cases that have some more interesting mechanics using this world. But it's been a lot of work trying to do this mundane directory data stuff, but once it's done, it's done. All right, well, maybe I'll sit here for a couple more minutes and then we'll call it a day. Jonathan Warner, what is the state of your case? Is it done and ready to play? I know it's been play tested. And when you think we'll play your case in December? I guess the bottom line for the volunteer stuff, I would love to have more volunteers working on this project. There's so many areas that we could use help with. Some are totally independent little projects. Some are tightly interwoven with the materials here. But if something about this project speaks to you, please reach out. Visit us on Board Game Geek, on the New York Noir webpage for Board Game Geek game page, or stop by the Discord, or write me an email, or join the Patreon, and just jump in and get involved. Really, one of the most enjoyable parts about this project is that there are lots of encouraging people, whether it's potential players or current playtesters or writers. It is really enjoyable to be able to interact with all of you. Jonathan says his case, you could play it in December, it could use a little bit of cleanup. We'll want to make sure it's up to date with the latest directories too, and then I'll print out another copy of the latest directories and then play Jonathan's case and Martinez's case and Anna's case. If you're interested, you could download and play our demo cases right now. Don't print anything out, but hopefully by the end of this year, we will have a final version. I know there are people who have been waiting to print stuff out until it's finalized. I hope that will happen at the end of the year. All right, why don't we call an end to this here? Another couple months, we'll do another update. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your ideas. And I'll see you next time.